everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Megan Rose Dickey. I'm a senior reporter with TechCrunch. You, of course, know Jeff Lawson, CEO of Twilio, and Anil Dash, CEO of Glitch.
Hey, everybody.
Yeah, so we're going to chat a little bit about algorithmic accountability and bias and just how to ensure that these technologies that we're using today are ethical. So I guess just to kind of kick things off, Jeff, this is your conference, so maybe you you can start. But
this is your conference.
It's our conference. What approach do you take to ethical artificial intelligence? How do you see it?
Well, I mean, I think there's two sides of the ethics thing that I typically think about. There's AI and the ethical implications of that, and I actually think we're just starting our journey as a company on AI. And so many others have done so much there, like Google with their duplex demo earlier this year, where they were, I think, trying to get headlines, but also going way out there and saying AI is going to fool the human beings, and what do we think about that?
Yeah.
And I think the world was pretty clear what they thought about that. In fact, it's now the law in the state of California that essentially bots have to identify themselves.
Well, and it's such an interesting thing, right? Because it gets into consent, it gets into data gathering, it gets into all these really, really tangled, complicated issues, and also just are you choosing to have a relationship with this company? I mean, I look at it from our standpoint. We're a small company, and we build tools for developers, right? Creative tools. And so there's sort of three ways that I approach the sort of same question. One is me as an individual. I'm a coder. I create apps. I have a responsibility at that level. I work with a team that makes tools for developers. So what's the grain of the wood? Like, what's the way the tool is biased? What does it encourage people to do? And then, like you, although at a much smaller scale, like I run a company. And so what does our company do, and how do we think about those things? And you kind of have to answer those questions at all three of those levels all the time. One of the things I come back to is, basic ethics practices day to day, separate from AI, separate from, what does the code do? Like, how do we treat each other? What are our responsibilities as a company? In the case of something like Google, I certainly think nobody should have to have a relationship with a company or share data with a company without agreeing to do so. I mean, that seems like a very, very basic. I mean, you can debate about, does anybody ever read the terms of service? Like, no, but at least it's there and you could consult it. But if an AI calls you at work, you work at a barbershop, and somebody's like calling to make an appointment, and you don't know it's not a person and it's Google, and you haven't even chosen to have that interaction, that clearly has to trigger the basics of, did I choose to be in this relationship or have this conversation?
Oh,
well, I was just going to say, to start off, I don't know how many of you know Glitch and know Anil, but Anil is, I think, one of the most prolific CEOs around in really expressing the ethics of what it is to be running a company, and he's very vocal about it. He's very privileged to be very vocal. We were saying, I'm not sure I can always be as vocal as you are. But I really admire how vocal you are about not just how thoughtful you are and how the company you're building, how you bring out about the products that you're doing, how you're building the company and treating your employees, but also how you think about what sort of we think about when we're building Twilio is there's certain things that are objectively right and wrong in the world, and as companies, it's our job to stand up for those things that are objectively right and stand against those things that are objectively wrong.
Yeah,
and I think that seems like something you've done. That's why we asked you to Anil, will you fly out here?
Yeah.
And can we talk about what's the lens that you use? What's the guiding? Yeah. And have you all used Glitch? It is amazing. It is amazing. Give the pitch for Glitch.
Oh, that's very kind. I appreciate that.
Tell the people. Sorry,
so it is a community for coders, and we have a tool. In your browser, you can go and instantly get an app up and running. And as you're typing, you can share the link with another dev, code together, sort of like Google Docs.
It's literally as you're typing. Don't you do a build on like every keystroke?
Yeah, exactly. So as you type, the app is live, and you're able to do. We have tons of people that build on Twilio APIs, on SendGrid APIs, and they're sort of building stuff out. And
I heard about those SendGrid guys.
Yeah, they're all right. And I think what people love is it lets them create really quickly, right? They're reducing those barriers, and that goes straight to all these conversations we're having about what are your ethical obligations, right? Because you take away the barriers. We're always reducing the barriers. We're also trying to increase access and like smooth the flow. But then the defaults that are baked in, that has so much to say about what we're doing with people's data, what we're doing about what their expectations are. Like, I think it increases our responsibility. And I appreciate all the kind words. I mean, we're still small and trying to figure this stuff out like everybody. But I think one of the things that comes to mind for me is like, what are the defaults that we build into the code, the examples that people are able to remix and build off of, and what do they teach people about best practices of how, something as simple as, text us to be able to interact with our company is valuable and powerful, but have we thought about the entire interaction and the life cycle of that and the way we are going to treat those people that choose to trust us with their information? I think it's one of the hardest questions. I've gotten it wrong. Part of the reason that I am vocal about it now is I've been on the wrong side of it before. I built social media tools back in the day, and we built early blogging tools. A couple folks here are probably old enough to remember like LiveJournal. You don't have to tell me about your site. I knew you had one. And we would run it, and we had people that were, as you see in social media today, hurtful, abusive, whatever. And we weren't strong enough in curtailing it. We weren't strong. We were like, it's free speech, and everybody should be able to say what they want, and you should toughen up if you want to be on the internet. Like all this stuff we still hear today. And then I spent enough years seeing people harmed by it to realize, oh no, we have an obligation, and we screwed it up, and we gave a platform to people that were being harmful. And I saw good people's lives ruined because of choices I made on platforms that I built. And I will never forget that lesson. I just can't. And what it ends up being now is people who haven't been through that are not bad, they're not wrong, they just haven't had that experience of seeing that.
It's like we keep having to relearn the same lessons over and over again.
That's right, that's right. And I'm like, for me, I'm not gonna relearn. Like I learned the lesson, I got it. I wanna be loud about it so that other people don't have to make the mistakes I've made.
Yeah, I think there are like a couple of core issues with, like when you think about algorithms, algorithmic bias and accountability. On one end, it's that default data that you were talking about, like what's being fed into this algorithm to then
training
make these
the AI.
decisions. Exactly. So is that information biased? Like who are the people who are inputting this data? Like what are their backgrounds? Like how are they perceiving the world? And then another issue I see, and I mean, yeah, feel free to chime in, is just that it's then what do companies allow these algorithms to be used for? Of course, like Amazon has been in the news recently for its facial recognition and providing that to law enforcement. I mean, how do you see those issues as both being kind of like top of mind, or how do they like kind of coexist?
I mean, the way I think about it, building ethical companies takes a lot of different forms. It's the technology you create, it's the, but even more than the technology you create, it's how do you actually make decisions? Right? So how are people in the company supposed to have the right framework to make decisions and make ethical decisions, and do they have that framework? Because by default, companies don't have a vehicle for ethics. Like it's just profit maximization is the core, shareholder value, and then it's like avoid bad PR. And it's like, okay, so within those boundaries, like how do you know that people are going to make the right ethical decisions? And I think that's where you see a lot of the social networks struggle with that. And like we, for example, you see people in Silicon Valley a lot say things like, well, we're just a platform.
Right.
We're just a platform. People
we're neutral.
Can say, people can do whatever they want. We're just transporting bits on their behalf. We can't change who people are. Right. And then you throw on top of that, algorithms that are curating what people actually see out of that. Right. So we're going to pluck out of the stream of things that people are saying and actually decide which ones are going to get the most attention. Which ones are going to sell the most ads, and those are going to, like, if you take a corpus of content that is like truthful things that people might have said, right, and then you have this corpus of things that's like any batshit insane thing that anybody says,
right,
and then you have AI optimized,
which is most
optimized for engagement and views.
Right.
Which one's going to win?
Right.
It's clearly the one with the craziest points of view,
and the software will be operating as designed. Right, it's not misfunctioning; it's properly functioning.
It is properly functioning,
this is what you've had.
And then, but you can no longer say like, "Well, we're just a platform."
Right, and I think that's a challenge that snuck up on a lot of people. Again, like I think there are very few sort of mustache twirling villains in Silicon Valley. There's some. It's not zero, but it's like it's a low number. It's single digits, and so putting those ones aside, like broadly. A lot of people are very well intentioned. Like, of course you want engagement. Of course you want to be entertaining. Of course you want to be compelling to people. Show them stuff that's interesting or engaging, and yet you end up down this path. And I look at, again, a very well-intentioned effort that was like, we're going to help, judges be more efficient at sentencing, so they can spend more time in the courtroom listening to people and do these things. And to do that, we're going to provide an AI that gives recommendations on sentencing, and they train it on the current system. Now, of course, you look at our criminal justice system, and like there are biases, and we know they're there, and they've been there for decades and centuries now. And so you train on that system, and you end up with unjust sentences that are biased by race, biased by geography, all these different things. And it's what it made me realize is AI in particular, but all the tech we build is a mirror, and it's a mirror showing us our values. And if we are studiously avoiding looking in the mirror all the rest of the time, and then the software is also a mirror, we're still going to not look at it, and we're still going to say like, I don't want to see what it shows me. And that's whether it's reflected in software, reflected in media and culture, reflected in whatever else, like you have to be willing to take a hard look at the flaws in us, in our society, culture, companies, as individuals, whatever it is, and then say, I'm going to change that. And I think we have the same reluctance to do that in tech and software and apps and AI as we do in every other part of society.
Yeah, I mean, on the topic of the criminal justice system, I mean, they're, as you mentioned, like using algorithms around sentencing or even predictive policing, determining which neighborhoods to police, which are of course based on
minority
very
report
biased
stuff,
racist data. And I mean, do you ever envision us getting to a point where algorithms and just technology in general can be used in a legitimately productive, helpful way? Or is the first step really to fix our societal issues, which is
step one, fix structural inequities in all of society. Step two, ship software.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is, like, does artificial intelligence have any business in the criminal justice system?
Pens down, everybody.
Right. I mean, I think it's already there. It is doing good. There are places it's doing good. I think being able to see data, to see patterns emerge is powerful. I look at epidemiology is a really good example. Like we have learned a lot about illness and a lot about how disease spreads by analyzing data. AI has a lot to contribute there, and that actually directly connects to effective law enforcement and thoughtful criminal justice reform and thoughtful ways of how we do healthcare and everything else. So like I think there are places where it's doing good already, and that's why I'm not. I love tech. Like I got into this world because I love to create. I love that feeling of being able to make something, and I still believe that can happen. I just think we can't. We've had a tendency to be either on one camp or the other, right? And I think you have to have that nuanced view to get it right.
It's just, obviously technology overall, I mean, it's just a tool, right? You can use a hammer to build a house, you can use a hammer to bludgeon someone. So it's a tool, and so it depends on like what problem are you trying to solve with that tool and how thoughtful are you in the way in which you're trying to solve it. And so the first thing I would say is great, like what problems we're trying to solve. The first problems we seem to be trying to solve is like, how do we curate media for mass consumption? They're like, okay, well,
well, we've done about as bad a job of that.
That's not Earth's like most pressing problem,
right?
But as we apply this technology to those things and try to say, how do we fix societal issues and issues of inequality and wealth distribution and all sorts of things like that, there are a tremendous number of ways where technology is fixing these problems. I mean, if you look at just the work of, like, even just the Gates Foundation of curing illness, and the trend has been eliminating poverty. The trend over the last 30 years has been fantastic because there's a lot of great things happening in the world, and I think AI will contribute a tremendous amount to those things. But just how do we apply it to the right problems, and then be aware of its limitations and aware of its impacts. But like, you think about certain things like, if mobile phones or just technology overall like allows people to open bank accounts with $1 worth of value because the marginal cost of opening a bank account is so small because of the low friction of this technology. Great, now we can have 1 billion more people who are banked, who were underbanked previously. And so it's like, those are the small things. They don't seem like, it's not like AI, Skynet type scenarios. There are a lot of small things here that you just sort of have to think about, like, oh, if the technology removes friction, makes something easier. And so AI is just a pattern matching machine. Yeah. Like, that's what AI is. It matches patterns, and it predicts patterns in data sets. Okay, so what societal problems that exist today that have, henceforth gone unsolved could be solved if you had something that was really good at spotting patterns, and you were able to train it to match the right patterns, right?
Well, and there's an interesting thing that happens because we say, I think that is an accurate description. It is recognizing pattern. we have a rhetoric, a way of talking about technology in general, AI in particular. It's neutral, it's a machine, it's like this dispassionate judge, and it requires us to pretend the patterns aren't skewed in the way that society is skewed, right? And I think the most recent Amazon example was that their AI that they had shut down, to their credit, was selecting against candidates who were not men, because they tended to not, in the past, have hired candidates who were not men. And so the system was like, oh, that's the desired behavior we're going to train on, and we're going to reproduce it going forward.
The funny thing is,
it learned the pattern.
In retrospect, like, I mean, that's so obvious. Like, that was what was going to happen. Like the Microsoft Tay.
Yeah.
I mean, what, you just hit your head and you say, like, who didn't see that coming? But I'm sure they were well intentioned.
Yeah.
And with 2020 hindsight, you can always say that.
Yeah,
I had a chance to talk to some folks on that team, and they're like, yeah, we saw it coming. We put these safeguards in place, and like I think it's just organizational stuff. Well, the person who was supposed to flip the switch didn't push the button. Like there's things that, like, it's software. It has bugs. The question is, are the bugs going to be, I got a slower response time on seeing the next video in my stream, or are the bugs going to be, we are putting people away for longer prison sentences, or we're denying them access to housing or to home loans or to economic opportunity. Like, those are very different categories of social impact, but the line of code difference might not be that big.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess I wonder how, as leaders of companies, what is your approach to ensuring that the AI is fair? And also, I mean, like, what does fair mean, and what does that look like?
I mean, I don't know that we're at a point yet where we have to make those ethical decisions on behalf of our customers, because right now it's like the data sets are fairly well known. Like, we launched a product yesterday, Autopilot, and it's trying to parse numbers out of spoken words. And so, like, do I really have ethical concerns about it parsing numbers in some sort of, like, biased way? Probably not. I'm sure.
It's a limited data space.
Yeah, it's a limited data space, limited domain. But that is going to accelerate rapidly.
Yeah.
Right? And so we've got, 41 data types where we're building the models. And then we are also giving the tools for you all to build models. And so how do we make sure, like you were saying, the templates are there to lead you to success? Some of the things that we've been starting to think about is great. Like, what are the templates that we're giving with Autopilot that will lead you to success, that will lead you to a place where you're proud of that outcome, whether it's our data sets or yours. And it's like, but I still think, I mean, we just announced our product yesterday. We're early on that journey, but I think the overall values of Twilio do take over, which is, we're here to do good, we're here to wear the customer's shoes, and ultimately, Twilio's a no shenanigans kind of company, and so our job is to kind of just figure out, okay, like, what is it that you need from us in order to not make mistakes that are obvious. Yeah, and we're going to do our best to try to figure that out, but it's an iterative process.
Yeah, I mean, we enable people to create stuff with AI, but we don't have sort of first-party services on Glitch yet that are AI. But what we look at internally as a team, I'm a New Yorker, and those of you who've been on the New York City subway, you see in every train car they've got the red handle for the emergency brake. And I think about that a lot. People almost never pull it, which is wild. Like, New York is full of, like, we're New Yorkers, and yet very few people pull the, thank you. Thanks.
We're New Yorkers.
Yeah, exactly. Very few people pull the red handle, but it's there. If you needed to, you could do it. And I think about enabling that a lot for our team is like, do you know that you're going to be supported and you have the trust of everybody in the company, including leadership, to flag something and say, we can't ship that. And then the frameworks we use for anything we create, any feature, any capability, because we're building a community too, and that has all the challenges of social networks that we talked about before. To think about, we do this exercise all the time internally. Literally this morning we were talking about this on a product feature we're building. If you take the person in the community of these millions of developers we have, who's most vulnerable, most at risk, has the most to lose, what is their experience going to be of this? What are the ways that a bad actor could, or somebody who unintentionally is being a bad actor, could use this system to hurt somebody? And we start there all the time with the features we build and the capabilities we build. And what's interesting is, it keeps coming back to, everybody who's got a security team and you work with, they do that all the time, right? They're always doing like penetration testing and the sort of,
input sanitation.
Exactly.
It's like a different form of input sanitation.
Right, exactly. Like black hat testing, all this stuff. Marketing even does this. So they say, what are the PR risks? What is the, like, if a 12-year-old boy made fun of our brand name, what would they say? Like there's all that sort of exercises people do.
You guys do that?
100%. Yeah. It's
do we do
like
that?
the brand guide.
Genevieve, have we done that? What happens if 12-year-olds make fun of Twilio?
Yes, we think about that a lot.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
because like we have like
That's a thing.
Yeah, I mean, like we have a brand guidelines thing like everybody does, and the company's called Glitch, and I was like, nobody's allowed to write glitch, please. Like that is not a thing.
Oh, I like that though.
But nobody had done it, and they're like, why did you do this? I was like, I was once a 12-year-old boy. Like I know exactly what I would do to get this wrong. So you do those things, and I mean, we joke about it, but like you do it in security, you do it in marketing, you do it in just like physical infrastructure, like your office. You make sure it's secure, and then you get to the safety and wellness and the well-being of the creators, the coders, the people who are building the platform, and then the people using that tech. And all of a sudden we let it go. We're neutral, we're not involved, or it's not our fault, we can't be responsible. I mean, it doesn't end there. It's just the exact same thing. And it's not any more scary to say, for the same reason that we don't want to leak your credit card data if we were storing that, we don't want to enable you to build something that is going to have harmful effects on people or to harass other people in the community or to abuse other people in the community. Once we reframed it that way, everybody got a lot more relaxed about it. Then it's just a step on the checklist.
But you know what's really hard though is like, especially as like platform type companies. We're a platform company. You're a platform company.
We're hoping to be, yeah.
Everybody talks about being a platform company, right? Like, and so it really does. Oftentimes it comes down to not just the tools that you make, but how they get used, right? I think Twitter or Facebook would probably say the same thing.
Yeah.
And then it's like, it really comes down to not just how they're used, but the intent of the person using it. And it's a really hard thing because it gets very subjective in some ways. And that's where I just go back to this like objective rights and wrongs is like, that's the way to run it. And like we had a thing, it was my co-founder texted me last year and asked, he just was curious. It was, he said, what would happen if we found a white supremacy group using Twilio? And I said, well, I'm pretty sure, probably, I don't know. And I like read the terms of service, and I'm like, I don't know. I mean,
it's not defined.
Ethically, I know what the answer is, but I don't know what we would actually do. I don't know if it would be obvious what we would do. And so we just said, okay, like I asked our general counsel. I called her up. It was a Sunday. I was like, can you make it so that by the end of this week, we can make it clear to the world that any form of hate speech is not permitted, but not just hate speech, because that's easy. Like you can look at that and be like, okay, that's hate speech, that's not. Like maybe machines can classify that, right? Probably. But what about someone who's organizing a rally?
Right.
Yeah.
And they're just sending out text messages. We're meeting at 10 p.m. at this thing, whatever. Like that's not hate speech. That's just organizing.
Yeah. Hate planning.
Hate planning, right? Exactly, right? And so we asked ourselves,
they got like a Trello board and all that. It's a lot.
Yeah, here's our layout, and here's our Twilio app, and here's our and we said like clearly, we asked ourselves like that's not obvious.
Yeah.
But if we knew, part of it's like how would you even know? But if you knew that was happening, I just said clearly we're not going to allow this, and that's easy. Yeah. And I asked our general counsel, I'm like, just figure out how to word that.
So we spent a lot of time thinking about this, and there's two parts of this that are really, I think, in the current moment, really important to understand. And the first is, you can set a policy, you can't use this word on this platform, right? And that's really clear. And people will spell it slightly differently and do the same thing, right? They're always gaming that and testing and probing. And that's sort of a known behavior, but it's a more intentional thing. Now, people do that on purpose to abuse platforms, where they're sort of playing with that. And related to that, people also like to push those boundaries because there's a lot of value to them in saying, I was shut down for doing that, right? For being an obvious bad actor in a way that was technically not in transgression
look at
of rules.
InfoWars,
right, exactly, right. So that's a space that is, most tech companies are not ready to engage with, where they're like, I don't know about making martyrs of people on a political grounds like that. We didn't know how to engage with that, and we're not fluent in that. That's one big thing that is just like, you got to have somebody on your team who's lived through it, been through it, fluent in it, paying attention to it, in the same way that you have to know what the security vulnerabilities are, and you have to know what your fiduciary duties are and all those other things. That investing in that, being fluent in that, I think a lot of companies are way behind, years behind.
So you think there's going to be like a title, there's going to be a role?
I think actually it can fold into what you're doing on security, it can fold into what you're doing in community and planning. Like it doesn't have to be, because there's that sort of tendency when everything is new and exciting, you make the chief whatever officer, chief shred officer. And Shred Officer, right, Tony Hawk, right? I think there's all these different titles that show up when something's exciting. I don't know what the org chart solution to it is. I think having somebody be accountable for it is important.
There's certainly there's a pattern matching of that you can do.
And to not get into an arms race with bad actors, right? Because once you do, you're already losing. As soon as you're chasing, like, well, technically I spelled it differently than the word that you're banning, you're like, you've lost. You just handed it to them. And I think that game keeps playing out over and
or,
over.
or give them the platform for a really long time such that they have 10 million
Get
followers
established,
or whatever,
right?
and then be like, all right, you know what?
Now we're going to shut it off.
Now we're going to, right?
Yeah, and I think that's one really important thing. The other thing I jump back to, like all of you are familiar with open source, and you look at how much shared knowledge and shared code and shared bug fixing you have with other people, and you're like, if you were at a company, I mean, God forbid some of you are, but like if you're at a company, it's like we don't ever use anything open source because we don't want to take on the risk of what other companies are doing, and you say, well, you also are not going to benefit from their work. The interesting thing is that open source conversation has played out over the last, call it 20, 25 years, and it's just sort of almost definitively shifted. Almost no company's not using something open source. Then you look at bad behavior, bad actors, known transgressors in a social network, in a platform, any platform company, and all of a sudden we're like, well, we don't consider things that happen off platform. We don't consider things that happen on other companies' turf. We don't consider things that happen out in the world. Only what happens here matters. So somebody's organizing a hate rally, right? And say, but they didn't do it on our platform. Our platform was just sending the messages to organize the rally. They didn't actually, put the propaganda out. All of a sudden, we're not learning the lesson of open source, which is there's more knowledge out of the room and out in the world than there could ever be in our organization. What if we learn from them and then we believe them? So if another platform, another site has banned somebody or says they were acting harmfully towards others, or this AI had these problems and we should learn from it, we have to bring that knowledge into our organizations. And we do it already in code. We do it in security. Security people are the most open and transparent knowledge-sharing people in the world. And then when we look about the health of our tech ecosystems, we're just not doing it around abuse. We're not doing it around harassment. And we can bring it through. There's no reason we can't learn that.
How important do you think it is for CEOs to come out on and very clearly take a side?
I think you have to. I mean,
Yeah.
this day and age, your customers and your employees, I think, require you on a lot of these issues that used to just be in the realm of politics that companies just stayed out of. We don't want to offend anybody. But now it's offensive to not have a point of view. It's offensive to not stand for something. And the hard thing, like, you can also get sucked into, like, you have to get involved in everything, and that's also not the right thing. Yeah. But I think there's just certain things where there's a line that gets crossed where you say, you know what, like, to us that is objective right and wrong, and something is in the objective wrong, and so we are going to make sure that it's known, because I think employees and customers demand it, and especially younger customers. I think millennials demand that of the brands that they work with. I think that is actually moving up to like all consumers, but employees too. I think it's interesting. Like, I don't know. Like we had a strong voice about immigration on our stage today. Yeah. And I don't know if any customers walked out because they disagreed with that. But to me, like, the reason why we took a stand, I was on an airplane, actually. I was flying out east the day that, the slow rollout of the story of what was happening at our border and detaining families and all that. And there was that one day, I think it was a Monday, when it just, like, the story really broke. Like, there was the audio recordings and all that. And I was on a plane and I was literally crying. Yeah. I was just like, I cannot believe this is happening. And like I'm Jewish, my grandparents were in the Holocaust, and just hearing about how a country and a people can oppress one of the populations there just hit home. And I was like, this is an objective issue of something that we are in the wrong. Yeah. And so we are going to, and I wrote a blog post in the plane that was basically speaking on behalf of Twilio, saying, you know what, like, we do not believe that this is ethical and we stand against this. Yeah,
I was so appreciative of that as somebody, I admire what Twilio does as a company, but I think it's a hard thing as a leader. You have a lot of responsibilities to people, you have a lot of people with different feelings in the company. I think those are hard things to balance. One of the things I struggle with personally is to be fluent in all the issues. Right? Sure. Like, I have strong opinions and I'm not afraid to share them, and we're small enough I can get away with it, so that's nice. But, I look at, like, my learnings the last 5-10 years on, like, say, issues for transgender people. Right, where I was like not fluent, not literate in these things 5 and 10 years ago, even with coworkers and friends, who were trans, and I just hadn't spent the time to do right by learning about it. And it's something that, like, and it's one example, but it was something where I was like uncomfortable confronting my own biases, like having to learn. And and it turns out people are really forgiving and really generous and really patient and really kind and really willing to help you learn if they think you're coming with an open heart and an open mind and want to learn about something. And that was really instructive for me as, like, you know, nobody is obligated to have to be your teacher, but people want to engage with you as friends and you know, colleagues and whatever. And I think there's so many things like that where everybody has something like, I don't know about this. I don't know what I feel about this. And that part, to give everybody space as, you know, colleagues, as leaders, as whatever your role is, I think is important. But the other part is, you know, I started my first company 25 years ago. Wow, I'm old. And it did not occur to me it would be like controversial to be like, Nazis are bad. Right? I'm like, come on, that's the bottom. Like every video game I played growing up, they were the bad guys. Like every, you know, Indiana Jones movie, it was like the easiest bad guys in the world. And now we have to like split hairs about, well, technically I don't feel this. Like, you know what? I'm not making this complicated. Like this thing is simple. It's easy. Like you got the little, you know, the symbols. We know what you're saying. And so like that was such a, I don't mean to be glib about it, but it was just like, there are things that are straightforward. And there are values that we actually share that people are trying to politicize that are actually pretty universal, like treating your coworkers with respect and being kind to children, like basic stuff. And I'm not, you know, me personally, I'm very comfortable to frame those things provocatively or to say them in ways that are provocative to people. But in terms of what the values are, they're really broad. They are not political. There are people that want to present them as more radical than they are when you're just saying stuff like treat people kindly. I think that stuff, it is incumbent on everybody to weigh in. And then, you know, the other part I look at is it helps you build a team that gives a damn.
Right.
It helps you get the right people in the door.
Yeah, and I mean, there are, of course, a lot of issues that, you know, as CEOs, you can decide to take a stand on, decide not to. A current issue that's kind of just like up for debate in San Francisco, so this is more directed toward you, Jeff, but Prop C, which is about taxing businesses to go toward homelessness efforts. You have Mark Benioff on one side speaking very loudly about it, then you have Jack Dorsey of Twitter speaking very loudly about it. They're on opposite sides. I mean,
the story to me isn't Jack Dorsey versus Mark Benioff. I mean, the story is, so there's a ballot measure. I don't know how many of you are San Francisco. I don't know how deep you want to get into San Francisco politics, but there's a ballot measure that is going to, I think, quadruple the funding for homelessness to solve the homelessness problem in the city, which, and it's a tax on business. And so, as you can imagine, some business leaders have said, you know, we don't like new taxes, but actually a whole lot. And Mark Benioff, who runs, I think, the largest company headquartered in San Francisco, it came out in favor of it. But the problem is not that. The problem is that the mayor and the elected officials, the people actually who are going to take that money and go use it, are opposed to this because they say we don't actually know how to spend that money. Like we don't know, there's no plan for this money. It's just a bunch of money, but the money we are currently spending is not put to use in an effective way, and we want to do this thoughtfully. And that's their point of view, and they're also concerned that there's some legal technicalities to how this ballot initiative was put on the ballot, so that we could implement this tax, have the whole thing held up in courts for years, and there went our shot to actually solve the problem. Right. So I think the phrase, like, you know, there's a great stalking horse of like Benioff versus Jack Dorsey,
right?
And like Jack actually looks like a villain. Like, so it's like, you know, it sounds like it's a nice binary, you know, here's the lovable, huggable Mark Benioff, and then here's this like villainous, but like
I mean, I know Jack 15 years. It's easy to make him look like a villain these days. Like, you know, there's a lot of the Twitter stuff. There's a lot of legacy.
He's got a beard.
The suits fit nice, but I think there's an interesting thing.
He looks like a comic book villain. Can we just agree on that?
There's a whole range of villainy of tech CEOs. Like, I'm very mindful. Like,
he's not Ellison, okay?
Right. Like, I'm just saying. Like, there's like the guys that have the volcano lair.
Ellison.
And well, yeah. I mean, that's like, he owns a Hawaiian island, so that's a volcano lair. That's very Bond villain. You and I, we got the bald-headed thing. That's the little like the you know, Austin Powers villain. And Jack's got the like, you know, nefarious, like, what Mark is saying, I don't want to help the homeless is what Jack is saying, which I don't think is true, but like that's the rhetoric. So there's a lot of different ways to be an awful tech CEO. What I look at is like Mark and Jack they know they're being provocative. They know they're the names in the story. It takes away from like everybody is in consensus of like the system for helping homeless people in San Francisco does not work. Everybody's in consensus there. Everybody's in consensus that it's an urgent need and something has to be fixed. Everybody's, you know, agreed some amount of money is part of the solution. And they're not approaching it as they would solve any problem in their companies. They're not approaching it as they would solve any systems problem where they're like, there's a lot of different factors. They're approaching it because they want to have a name and a face in front of it. Like that's the part I have beef with both of them is like, you know, what would you do if you were grown-ups who actually manage a lot of resources?
Yeah, right. You know, it's interesting. I mean, everyone has asked me like what do you like, give money, take a stand, whatever. And I've kind of been like, you know what? I don't know enough. Like I've heard what the mayor has said. I heard what Scott Wiener, one of the state representatives, has said. He represents San Francisco, and I've heard and these are people who've been in government for a long time, running the operations of the city. I've heard what they've said, and I'm not sure. Like, why am I the person who's going to come out? Like, why do they need me?
Well, and broadly
like,
in society.
The answer is, but it's also a trap, right? If the answer is this is the right way to solve homelessness, fantastic. We're all in favor of it. This is a huge problem in San Francisco. But if it's not, and you say, I'm not for this, and then you get villainized, well, you're just a business person who doesn't want to get taxed. Well, it's like, okay, so I'm just getting bullied into saying, yep, just throw money that the actual people who have to use that money say is worthless. Like, that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, there's no thoughtful way to engage with it. And I think part of the problem...
unfair engagement because it's not actually listening to the root of the problem nor the fixes. It's just become an optical war.
Yeah, there's also, I think, a meta issue, which is like, tech CEOs aren't qualified to handle this problem, period. Right?
Yeah.
And you know, like, we are not a society that needs more billionaire CEOs making decisions about public policy, period.
That's true.
You know, and like that's not, I don't think either Mark or Jack, and like, I like these guys. I think they're pretty decent dudes overall, as much as they can be in the context they're in. I don't think either of them is fluent in the issues that homeless people face. I don't think they have any conversations with homeless people where they say, what do you need? How can I help you? I don't think that's where they're starting from. And so I think, and I don't think they talk to the people who do have those conversations.
But I do appreciate the leadership.
Yes.
I think that business has a role.
Taking a stand
leadership
matters.
Role, yes. But it's sort of one of these things, exactly what you're saying.
Know your lane.
Do they know?
Yeah.
You
Just know your lane. Like my thing is like, I have opinions on immigration because I am the child of immigrants. I have, you know, opinions on issues that are things that I'm fluent in, and I try not to talk outside of my lane. Like, I'll be strong on the stuff I know, but I'm just like, I don't think it's credible that we're asking these guys to be leaders on this, and then you got to pick a side. I think, you know, you've got convening power. You can do events like this. You can have as many people, you know, these guys, put them in a room. You know, like that solution where you're like, let's work out, like, how do we help and who do we need to support? And neither of them is talking about the organizations that they want to enable. Neither of them is talking about individuals that are helping, you know, actually doing the work on the streets or helping homeless people. Like, that to me is the signal of like, are you solving this problem?
And the people who are, though, I mean, that's who we should be listening to here. And that's what challenges me about this current debate, is that like the people who, you know, the mayor and the people who are going to actually implement this, they've expressed a clear point of view. They were, you know, non-equivocal about saying like, this is not the right way to solve homelessness. And I'm like, who am I to disagree with people who've been trying to solve this problem? People would say, yeah, they've been unsuccessful in solving it for time, so maybe we shouldn't listen to them.
Yeah.
I guess you can take that, but I still think that, you know, we're tech. We believe in trying things, and when they don't work, we go back to the drawing board and we try again. So that's the ethos we take when we build our companies, when we build our products. We're iterative. Why would you assume that that can't be the way it is in government if these are smart, well-intentioned people, which I believe they are?
Well, and I think we always talk about being, you know, on tech side, user-centric or, you know, customer-centered, all these designs, all these things that we do. You talk about who are we serving? I mean, this is the job of government, public policy, all these things. And like, I want to hear the voices of the people we're trying to serve. I want to hear the voices of people who have lost their homes. I want to hear the voices of people who are on the street and the people who work with them. And I think that applies to every one of these issues. I think that is how you solve even the systemic problems around AI, around tech, is like, who are the people that are going to be impacted? Who are the most vulnerable? Who are the most at risk? And what do they say about what they want to see these tools do for them? And then just listen. You know what I mean? Like, it's not that hard to be like, all right, we'll give what you want. Like, tech, that makes that part easy.
Absolutely. Are there any questions from the audience? Yeah, I realize we got
We've solved all these problems.
Any questions from the audience at all? Yeah, is there a microphone or anything, or?
We can repeat it.
Just, yeah.
Okay, so you have this problem, you have this issue that like you want to take a stance on something, but a lot of these issues, especially Twilio with the diversity, you know, movement, that is almost inherently political. And I remember a few years back, I'm kind of dated when it comes to some of the social issues and technology. I think I can talk quieter now. Hello, testing. Okay. I remember Joyent kind of publicly bashed one of their foreign engineers who had claimed that their language didn't have gendered pronouns. So this engineer at Joyent was like, well, I don't want to approve this pull request, this code change, to change all the documentation to non-gendered, pronouns, and it's like, well, their language didn't even have that. So how do you implement these kind of initiatives that are already inherently political here? And to take a stance on that, and then kind of a follow-up to that, growing into an international company, dealing with that and taking a stance that might inherently be against or opposed to the cultural norms of, I'm going to pick on just a random country here, I apologize, Brazil, for example, that might have very different cultural ideologies than the United States, for example.
So I think that the way I think about it is you are trying to, first of all, settle on the objective rights and wrongs of what you think your company stands for. Because then you have a basis to work from. And if there's like people who disagree, like if we believe in, it's objectively right to say that like human rights, the arc is to increase human rights in the world. And if you disagree with me on that, it's okay that you don't work at Twilio or you're not my customer. Like there's like that, like once you get to objective right and wrong, if you disagree with me, it's not a matter of you have your opinion and I have mine. It's like, okay, if we disagree on that, I don't mind if you're going to say I'm going to opt out of being a part of my sphere. And that's different from opinions. Like, I don't care who you vote for, but if they're going to oppress people in our name, I'm opposed to that. And that's different for, you can vote for who you vote for, or believe, or join a party that you're in, or have a belief system that you have, and that's fine. But as long as that belief system doesn't offend an objective truth of how we think the world should work that we can agree on, then that's the basis for it. So if you think about something like diversity, diversity is a difficult one for a lot of well-intentioned, smart people to actually think through. And I have seen well-intentioned, smart people get very caught up in it sounds good, but then aren't you going to not hire some very talented, white male engineer for a job, right? Isn't it, or quotas or stuff like that? And the way I express it is, look, don't ignore all that. Or other people say, like, it's not my fault if women aren't getting undergraduate degrees in engineering. Like, I can't solve that. I can't force women to go become engineers. So why do I have to build a company that has disproportionate, like, more engineers than there are just in the world? Like, that can't be my problem. I can't change society. Like, you're right. You probably can't change that single-handedly. But what you can do is just say this. As I said yesterday on the stage, we want a company. Our goal, our probably unachievable goal, is that Twilio perfectly reflects the world that we serve and perfectly reflects the communities that we serve. That is our eternal and probably unachievable goal. I mean, perfect, right? But the reason is because we want every person with the skills to help us achieve our mission and build a great company to want to join our company. And what happens if you don't go out of your way to build that company that everybody who can help you to achieve your mission wants to join? They won't. And so if we, in the early days of Twilio, I did not think about diversity. It was I remember one of our early investors was Mitch Kapor. Mitch and Freda, his wife, they're very active in issues of diversity in tech. And he used to invite me to dinners, and they used to have all these things. And I was always like, I don't have time for this. Like, I've got a company to make sure it doesn't go out of business tomorrow. Like it's a startup, it's frantic. I don't have the luxury of thinking about diversity. At some point, I got one of those invitations. I was like, well, wait a minute. When is it going to be the right time? Like, when we're 1,000 white male engineers, then suddenly I'll be like, okay, now I got time. Right? And by the way, by the time you get to that point, it's too late. You're screwed. Like, Google has basically given up on their diversity efforts. They realize there's nothing they can do to change the trajectory that they're on. It's just too big, too entrenched. It's game over. And so it's up to us who are younger in building our companies to try to set it right. And that's where we started on our journey. But the way I phrased it has always been like, look, if there is somebody who's from an underrepresented background who is perfect to help us achieve our mission, when we hand them an offer letter, they need to look around and be like, yep, that's the company I want to work at. And the only way they're going to feel that way is if the company reflects them and reflects the society that we live in. And we have to go out of our way to create a company because it doesn't happen organically, we all know. So that means we have to go out of our way to create that company. And if we do that, we'll actually have a competitive advantage because people who ordinarily wouldn't work at a company that didn't attract them and where they didn't feel they belonged will actually say, yes, I want to work at Twilio. And so that's the business justification for it. There's other business justifications as well about building better products and all that. The AI stuff is getting even more
reducing
important.
risk, a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. But to me, it's very clearly like it just needs to reflect the communities that we're serving. And to your second question about internationally, it is really interesting. Like we set these goals around diversity. Like we want 30% of our company in 5 years to be underrepresented populations. But the definition of underrepresented is different everywhere in the world. Like we have a large office in Estonia. So let's talk to Estonians about diversity. Peter, you've been there. It's a very white place. It just is. Yeah. Right? So it's not like we're going to try to have a population there that's like 50% people of color. Like it just doesn't, that's not the population of Estonia. But Estonia, what does diversity mean? Well, you've got Estonians, you've got Russians, you've got Latvians, you've got Lithuanians. And so what's the right makeup of that office to properly represent that population so that every talented person in that area, that community, will say, yes, I want to work at Twilio. I want to accept that job offer. And so it's a different answer based on the geographies where you're talking about, but basically that does end up getting localized. There's a few hard problems though that do come about. Like number one is you can always say like, okay, well, you can have your marketing and HR teams, which are women, and then your engineering teams, which are men. And then overall blend it and be like, yep, 50%, right? Yeah, that doesn't really get the job done. Yeah, that is a lot, right?
It happens a lot. It happens a lot of companies.
So we actually have started looking at diversity down at the team level because that's really where you need the diversity. You need the people working together every day making decisions to reflect the world that we're operating in. And then the other like a variant of that is to say, okay, well, like one way to solve diversity problems is just put offices in places, segregate your offices. Like we're gonna have an office somewhere here which has a large community of people of color, and we're gonna put an office here which is a lot of white people, and then like, okay, again, not gonna solve the problem. Like that's not really getting what we're getting at. Although, there are reasons to make sure you have a diverse representation of your company geographically, but again, that's not enough. That doesn't really get at the purpose of why we're undertaking this.
Yeah, I would add a little bit of color. We're obviously at a different scale. We're at a different scale, and we have a different set of problems and challenges. I thought it was
Couldn't
funny.
help it.
And one of the things I see is actually it is political. People politicize this. There's no two ways about it, right? If I say, so by early next year, if hiring goes according to plan for us as a company, we will be pretty evenly split on gender between people who are men and people who aren't. That is not what our company, 4 years ago, we were overwhelmingly male, right? And we'll probably be proportionally representative within the US of like sort of broad racial trends in the US. So like that's certainly a goal and where we want to be. It's easier to do at our scale than it is in bigger companies. But also because people know me and I'm a loudmouth about this stuff and they feel like, okay, we're probably going to be treated okay in that company because if he was a jerk or a creep, we would know by now. But what comes out of that is people saying, but it's political, right? It's political for you to say that you want to have, 50-50 representation on gender or, inclusive of people outside the gender binary within, a tech team, within a marketing team, whatever else. Okay, that's fine. If they're saying you're trying to be, society, to your point, society is what it is and why are you trying to change it? I was like, the whole point of what we're doing is to try and change society. Like, why did we start a company, start making products in the first place? It wasn't to leave things the same way they are. Right? The whole point was to innovate. The whole point was to make something better than what we had.
But it's a convenient excuse to say, well, I can't solve that problem.
Or even where are the places that we're going to take risks? Where are the places that we're going to innovate? Where are the places where we're going to push the world forward? And one of them is going to be on people and how we treat people, period. And, I think that's something where it's interesting how founders, CEOs, leaders, where they have courage and where they don't, and where they take a stand and where they don't. And, if it's removing the headphone jack, everybody's got courage, right? And I'm like, that's
not if it impacts profits.
Well, right, yeah, but it's like, that's not the hard part, as it turns out. Like, if you're going to redesign Snapchat, like, everybody's got courage. I think, there's a thing where, like, life is short. I got, 40 years left, depends on how many pizzas I eat. And I think I'm not doing 100 more startups. Like, I want to be running the company I'm running now for many, many years to come with the people that I got here, for many, many years to come. And so given that I'm not going to do this a million times and I'm not trying to make a million different things, like I'm making something with purpose and I feel like everybody on the team feels that way, who's going to come with us on that trip? What are they going to represent? Are we going to have the benefits of all the different kinds of knowledge that they have? That matters to me as much as the product and the community and all those other things. Like, we're designing an entity that will, if we do it right, certainly outlive me, that matters a lot. And I think that's something that, everybody shies away from, but I look a lot, like I had a 7-year-old son. And we were talking about this a bit, earlier today of like, what are the things he's going to be aghast about me, right? Like my dad told me he smoked in college, and I remember as a little kid, I was like, oh my goodness, like I was scandalized, right? like it's so bad for you. He's like, yeah, I know. And now, I look at my 7-year-old, he's going to grow up and like go to college, come back as like, Dad, I'm a vegan now. I'm like, okay. And he's going, I can't believe you used to eat meat. And I'm like, I'm a flawed man. I like a Shake Shack burger. And then, what are the other things that he's going to say? I can't believe you did that. I could not countenance if one of the things he says is you made a company, an institution that was profitable but excluded people. That the products and the tools you made hurt people. That you didn't anticipate something that everybody was telling you about and everybody's thinking about and everybody was articulating the value of, not just business value, but just social value, just good in the world. And if he says to me, he comes back and he is able to accurately say to me, you messed up because you didn't give people a shot, when I know my personal experience of my parents coming to this country and opening these doors for me that they have, I know what it looked like when they had doors slammed in their face. When my dad arrived in this country, like he was working in the South, Jim Crow's still in effect. Like that's our lived history, and I learned a lot from his experiences. I'm like, I can't be disrespectful to that history and be proud of the work that I do, no matter how successful we are on the other side.
Maybe a really quick follow-up to that, just to play kind of devil's advocate on the side of objectivity and the side of platforms lasting a long time, or you hope so, or becoming a platform and that lasting a long time. How do you avoid the problems of the past where even scientists at times thought that their viewpoints were objectively the right thing? And I think we see that in the history of racism, both against blacks and against Jews in various countries and various cultures. How do you say, okay, I'm going to stand up for what is objectively right, but I also know it's objectively right. I know that I'm just not shutting down something I disagree with, right? How do we,
the question
as a
is really
society,
like
deal with that?
human rights, right? And the arc towards increasing human rights. Is there a chance that we'll look back and say, you know what, that was wrong? I don't think so. I don't think there's going to be some future where I wake up and be like, you know what, yeah, less human rights, that was the answer. I mean, now how you implement it, like I know what you're talking about, this pseudoscience that led to all sorts of bad things, like those are the implementation details of the day, that some people got right, some people got wrong, and that's history, and that's where you just have to be smart and analytical, and sometimes you'll make mistakes and sometimes you won't, but the purpose, like the why behind that whole thing, like that's what I think about. So are we incarcerating children at our border? Is there any future where I'm like, yeah, you know what, it turns out that was a great idea? I don't think so. I can't imagine one. Because to me, that offends human rights. The objectively right thing that I just believe in the fullness of time will always prove out is the arc of justice. And so that's how I think about it. And there's a whole lot of things, by the way, where I don't take a public stance. And like as a company, we wouldn't take a public stance because they're not as clear. And those things tend to be more politicized because they're opinions. But then there's certain ones that I think are just so clearly aligned to the objectively right and wrong parts of things that's where I think it's our job to take a stand.
Yeah,
and there's a force that asks you to take a stand on everything. It's like you need to be like, just kind of pick.
You're like
pick the right issues. But if you decline to take a stance when it is, in my opinion, those objective issues, your lack of a stance is telling as well.
Yeah, I would call it two quick things. One is I know I'm going to get it wrong sometimes. 100%. I have in the past. I will again. Are we iterating? Are we evolving? Are we listening to feedback? Are we looking at where we have hurt and harmed people accidentally, unintentionally, but listening, I think is part one. Part two is, you go back to history, all the pseudoscience stuff, phrenology and eugenics, all these sort of awful sort of things done in the name of the objectivity or whatever. Or even the most egregious things. You look at people who were enslaved. They were never unclear it was a wrong. If you look at the people on the wrong sides of pseudoscience that are excluded, harmed, and penalized, they were never unclear. Like all you have to do is talk to the people affected, right? And so that's the thing that's very clarifying to me, and part of the point about why you want to have everybody in the room when you have these conversations. If I can say to somebody, what was your family's experience of being on the wrong side of that policy, and they can tell me their lived experience, all of a sudden everything's real clear because people know that they love their coworkers and respect them and they want to treat them right and they believe them. You sit face to face with somebody and they says, my family was affected by that policy in this way that that some people thought was right, but this is what our experience was. All that stuff falls away and it gets very simple. And I think to that point, like, how do I reduce the chances of being wrong? How do I reduce the times when like I said, I know I'm going to make mistakes. I know we're going to get it wrong. But the more people we have in the room who've lived that and been able to add nuance and say, well, my family was affected in this way, my personal life was affected in this way, my ability to, make the family that I want or to be with who I want, whatever it is, that stuff's very clarifying.
I think that's a good note to end on. We're unfortunately out of time, but thanks so much for joining me up here, and thanks everyone for listening and participating.
Thank you, Megan.
Yeah,
Thank you.